Hello, and welcome to the Science Fiction and Fantasy Marketing Podcast, the show where we help you establish your author brand, increase the size of your audience, and sell more books. I'm Lindsay Baroker, and I'm here with Jeffrey Poole and Joe Lalo. And we have a great guest for you this week, Gail Carriger. She's going to talk a little bit about her traditional publishing stuff and that she's been doing successfully for several years, and also about some of her self-published projects. She's been on both sides there, so should give us a good perspective. But for those who are not familiar with her, I'll read her little bio quickly, and then I'll let her talk because she's more interesting than I am. But here you go. Gail writes steampunk comedies of manners mixed with paranormal romance. Her books include The Parasol Protectorate, Custard Protocol, Supernatural Society, the Delightfully Deadly series for adults, and the Finishing School series for young adults. She's published in 18 different languages and has over a dozen New York Times bestsellers via 7 different lists. #1 in manga. I'll have to ask you about that, Gail. She was once an archaeologist and is overly fond of shoes, octopuses, and tea. And as I said, she's dabbled in self-publishing too and has short stories and novellas out. So we'll be asking her about all that stuff. Hi, Gail. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks you guys for having me. I'm so excited. I listen to you all the time, so this is very exciting for me to be here.
That's awesome. We're glad that you're listening, and I'm sure you're going to have a lot of great knowledge to share with our listeners, our other listeners. Why don't you, kind of take us back to the beginning and tell us how the road to getting that first novel published went?
Well, I'm kind of one of the last gasps of someone who was pulled out of slush. So my book was kind of pulled out of the slush pile in 2007, and then by about 2009, because that's traditional publishing for you, the first one came out. So yeah, I guess it's a path that can't really be repeated these days. I don't think there aren't a lot of big publishing houses that take slush anymore. But I actually found my agent because I had a deal on the table. So yeah, that's pretty much it. That's the road to traditional publishing.
That's cool. I actually didn't know even in 2007 that you could just submit a manuscript anymore. I thought that those were already into the days of you must have an agent in order to submit.
Well, there were only a few that were taking it, and I submitted to one of those few. That is actually not the publishing house that I ended up with, but I did then have an offer on the table from that publishing house, which allowed my agent to kind of step in and take us to others. That's sweet.
Possibly. You have a bird under the bed, maybe under the desk. All right. Well, I feel like we've talked about it a little before on here that steampunk seems to be like a fairly niche genre or subgenre. Was the publisher? Were they excited about it? Were they afraid that it wouldn't do well? I mean, yours has got some crossover appeal, of course, but yeah. How did it go?
So it was actually pretty hilarious because I met them at Denver Worldcon, and I met my new publisher. It was all very exciting. I was wet behind the ears, very, very, very nervous author. And it occurred to me, and I realized this much later after having met them, that they had bought this book and had no idea what to do with it. They were just like, we don't know what this is. We don't know what to wrap it in. We don't know anything about this book. So yeah, I think they were a little confused about it. It actually worked very much in my favor because what happened was everybody was confused about it. This was back in the days of Borders and Barnes & Noble, and nobody knew where to shelve it because they put fantasy and horror on the spine, and I don't write horror, but that's what they put on the spine. So people were putting it in the romance section. They were putting it in with urban fantasy. They were putting it in with paranormal romance. It slotted into YA. And finally, there was sort of a cadre of kind of just booksellers across the nation who just took stacks of it up and had it next to their till. And were just kind of hand selling it to people because they loved it so much, but they couldn't figure out where to put it in the stores. And so it really worked in my favor because I ended up with fans from all over the place because of that. So I have a lot of romance reader fans and a lot of, sci-fi fantasy fans as well. But it was purely by accident, I think.
Well, that's great that it worked out, and they didn't just say like, oh, we don't know what to do with this, put it in the back somewhere. If somebody requests it, we've got one.
It helped that I got a really killer cover, and it's a cover that has kind of become iconic for steampunk. That kind of awkward pose of the upper body of a woman in very steampunk garb with this sort of atmospheric London in the background. And then they put these sort of very cheerful slashes across the cover. So it was a very kind of visually iconic cover that got a lot of recognition as an art piece, quite apart from being a, you know, this crazy new steampunk thing, which we don't understand.
No, that's great when you actually get a cover you like, especially when you have absolutely no say whatsoever. And I hear more from traditionally published authors that are like embarrassed by the covers. So
that happens too. I actually have unprecedented say in my cover because one of the things that happened at that aforementioned meeting at Denver Worldcon was they sat me down and they said, "Well, we're really excited about your book and we really love it, but do you have any ideas about a cover?" And I have grown up being around traditionally published authors, and so there's this part of my brain that was like, it's a trap! It's a trap! Author has no say. Do not answer that question. And so what I said to them was, I'm sure your marketing team is going to do a brilliant job with the cover, but if I come across any sort of inspiring images for a design board, I'll just send those your way. And I actually found the image that's on Solus, that's on that cover. On one of my steampunk fashion forums, and I kind of just ganked the image and sent it to them and said, "Hey, this is sort of how I imagine the main character." And I heard silence. I heard nothing. And then like 3 months later, Donna, who is the model and would be the model for all of my books in that series, friended me on Facebook and said, "I just signed the contract for your book cover." So I was like, oh, I guess they liked that image I found. But it is really, really unusual in traditional publishing to have any kind of say over your cover. I will say that occasionally I will look at indie covers and realize why the author should be far away from the art department. Besides, have you seen what authors wear to events sometimes? I mean, aestheticists, possibly not so much. But I usually do get at least some ask. They've kind of involved me ever since because my YA series, which came after, knew that I had some influence over my adult books, and so they asked me about my opinions on covers. And I'm real careful about saying anything or getting upset about anything, because if I want to throw my weight around, I got to use it very sparingly. But I also have been pretty universally lucky with my covers, frankly.
All right. Well, that's great that it worked out. And, you're talking about me, the author that shows up in the hoodie and cannot be trusted to match colors or now I know I just say, put a cool spaceship on it to my cover designer. That's it. I cannot be trusted to offer opinions.
Yeah, I mean, as much as authors mess up their covers, frankly, publishers mess up their covers. But I am a big advocate of if you're going the indie route to find a professional cover designer to help you out with your stuff, unless that is a serious skill set you already have. Because Kindle cover disasters exists for a reason, and it's mostly to entertain me. Yeah.
Okay.
Chuck Tingle gets them.
Oh, his are iconic though.
Yes, indeed, in all the wrong ways.
Yeah, but okay. So your first book, from looking in from the outside, I feel like you've kind of been in the steampunk category, doing well there for years and years, and in other categories too. It sounds like. So, did your publisher? You've got a lot of books out. Did your publisher just say, "Keep giving us more of the same. We're loving it," or have you had any projects that you weren't able to pursue, and how's that gone?
They pretty much. So at the very beginning there for the first series, I was producing one every 6 months, which I can't do. It turns out that's too much for me. So I asked them to pull back and to do one every 8 months, and then I took a bit of a break, and now I'm doing one for trad a year, and then doing my own independent projects on the sideline. So yeah, their philosophy at the time, and remember this is almost 10 years ago now, was throw as many on the shelf as possible, so there's as many there as possible, so people can find you and get invested in you. And this was also kind of at the early days of second wave steampunk. So it was sort of a new genre too, and there weren't very many women authors writing in steampunk, so it kind of had some recognition going for me in that respect. And some other weird stuff happened around my first book. It came out right around the time of the DVD release of Serenity, the Firefly movie, and one of my really good friends was my web designer, and he is a big brown coat, and he just spread the word through all of his sort of brown coat friends. And so what happened was a bunch of people bought Serenity DVD and then bought my book. And so Amazon's algorithms started showing my book to anybody who liked Firefly. This is back in the day before the algorithms were quite as non-hackable as they are now, or harder to hack. So yeah, I had like strange things like that happen with my book, which I don't think are kind of repeatable phenomena now. But to this day, I still have a lot of brown coat fans and readers, which I think just is from that one just synergistic moment in time.
Well, there's nothing wrong with a little luck going your way, for sure, as an author. So what made you decide to kind of branch out and start doing some short stories and novellas on your own?
So I'm quite a bit of a control freak, and there's certainly things about traditional publishing that I found very frustrating. The timeline, the lack of nimbleness, the lack of information. I mean, my publisher does give me royalty statements, and I do have some information on my numbers, but you know, the lack of the immediacy of that information. Like I was very attracted to the idea that I can try things and then immediately see if they're effective in terms of numbers or sales numbers or my associate's code or whatever it is. I'm an archaeologist, so I love like spreadsheets and analytics and data and crunching numbers and you know, knowing everything I can about my readership. So I also write a very huge cast of characters, and there's a lot of really popular side characters that I really wanted to give their own kind of stories to, but they weren't really meaty enough to have a whole novel or even a series. So, and I love the novella length. My publishing house isn't interested in that length. So there are many, many, many reasons. The biggest one is the nimbleness for me. Like the idea, and I can give you a great example, which is I got invited to San Diego Comic-Con as a special guest this year. And because I have independent projects in the works, I could accelerate one of those and bring it to publication for Comic-Con. And Trad has given me a great working relationship with independent publishers. So I know I can kind of bully one of the independent publishers who's going to be there. Not independent publishers, independent bookstores. I can bully them into stocking my book, and I can produce a book like in conjunction with having been invited to be a special guest. So, and I could not do that. Like Trad could never respond that quickly to that kind of thing. The invite only came a month ago. So the biggest thing for me is the nimbleness and the kind of ability to write whatever I want with no gatekeeper whatsoever.
Yeah, there's definitely something to be said for that. I've noticed, yeah, it looks like you mentioned doing side stories or stories with side characters, and so it looks like it's all kind of in the same world. Was your publisher, did you have to fight for that, or was there anything in your contract that said, sorry, you can't do that?
Yeah. So the thing we're dodging around talking about are two clauses in most traditional contracts for the listening audience, and that is your option clause and your non-compete clause. So the first clause, which is the option clause, is basically gives the publisher the right to option the next thing you write. A good agent will give you a very narrow option clause. You want the narrower the better. So an option clause that says, I can option the works of alternative history or steampunk written under the name Gail Carriger that are novel length. That's a great option clause because it means that the publishing house only really has the right to look at something that I write that fits under those parameters. So I could write anything else. I could write science fiction, I could write YA, I could write short stories or novellas or whatever, and it wouldn't fall under that clause, so I can really do whatever I want with it. My option clause is a good one, so I did not have a problem with that. The issue is now these days with something called the non-compete clause, which is claimed to be structured so that you can't have two books come out from two different publishers too close on top of each other. The idea being that the author's resources as a promotional tool shouldn't be thinned in such a way. So one house can't send me on book tour only to have me land, be exhausted, and then send me out on another book tour. Ostensibly, that's the reason. Publishing houses have been using that op clause to limit you from publishing indie works within the window of a trad book, on the strange assumption that somehow less books from someone's favorite author will mean they won't buy the books from the favorite author, which, of course, if you know anything about indie publishing, is clearly not true, because a voracious reader is a voracious reader and they just want more of what you write. So that clause can be contentious. I have managed to mostly dodge around both of these clauses by spacing my independent stuff as far enough away from my traditional published stuff as possible, which is great for me as a writer, because it just means there's not a big time lag between projects for my readers. They know to expect a couple books a year now, and they kind of know they'll be spaced a couple of months apart. So, that's all right, so long as and the other way I do it is I always tell, regardless of the book. So the next book that I have coming out, the one that's for Comic-Con, is urban fantasy, and it's modern setting. So it's nothing to do with my Parasol books. But I'm still going to tell my traditional publisher that I'm doing it. They won't have a say in whether I produce it or not, but I'm telling them that I'm doing it. Because that's just kind of the polite thing to do. It's like, I'm over here, I'm doing a book. I would also tell them if I had a book coming out with a different publisher or anything like that. So there are sort of reserved, but it sure is a balancing act. And I would advise anybody who's listening to this, who's interested in trad or trying to get a contract to trad, to pay extremely close attention to those two clauses, your option clause and your non-compete clause. And any good agent should be really focused on those these days.
Yeah, definitely good advice. And because I think a lot of people listening would love to do, right now it seems like the hybrid thing is sort of the best of both worlds. Here the traditional publishers have really helped you establish a fan base. And so when you go into the self-publishing stuff, you've already got all these fans who are just going to jump in and buy it. So that's awesome.
Yes, exactly. And I very much recognize how lucky I am about that. And I was also really lucky in that I'm a Silicon Valley girl, and a lot of my friends are in tech. And so even though it was sort of the early days of social media and stuff, I was really thoughtful about owning my own brand and making sure to be really careful about my readership and kind of claiming the readership for me, as opposed to allowing my publishing house to not do anything with that readership or to claim it for themselves. So that I had also had a foundation of kind of having my readers and knowing them and being friends with them and interacting with them already before I even thought about doing hybrid stuff. Because when I first signed with trad, self-pub was still a pretty bad word back then. So I wouldn't even have thought to do it. But sure, I certainly owe trad my platform. Absolutely, they totally established me, along with a good deal of serendipity when that first book came out.
All right, well, I'm going to ask you a little bit about the social media and mailing lists later. We're going to talk in the marketing half, but let the guys ask a few more questions about how you got started and everything.
Yep. First, I just want to say it's nice to hear so much of what got you where you are is cannot be replicated by our listeners, and it's nice to hear you acknowledge that, because we've had every now and then you'll hear someone giving advice. I don't think it's really happened on this show, but you'll give advice that absolutely cannot be followed. And it's just
it's hard because people do ask me for advice, and they're like, "How did you make it? And how do you get what you are?" And I really am like, it was so many things. I mean, there was weird stuff that happened at BEA that year when my ARC was being given out. it was the like only commercial genre fiction mass market paperback that year at BEA, just by chance. And so everybody picked it up and then stuck it in their back pocket to read on the subway on the way home in New York. And so all of these people who wouldn't normally read it just all read it in New York publishing, this like strange, funny little frivolous book that they got just because it was the right size and Tor wasn't there that year. You know, like it was stuff like that, which, you know, just gave it an incredible boost, which really is non-repeatable. But like being a control freak, what I kind of concentrate on now is the aspects that I can repeat and what I can capitalize on. So.
Yeah, which is definitely what we're looking for. So first off, you are the I think third person in a row we've had who has found success with some level of comedic flavor in their stuff. You comedies of manners, right, are well suited to British sensibilities, and steampunk is leaning heavily on Victorian England, so it seems like it's a natural combo.
Yes, absolutely.
Do you feel like just about any genre can be improved by some, you know, appropriately written humor?
Yes. I feel like it's something that commercial genre fiction is really hungry for too. There just never seems to be enough of it. You're never going to win awards for it. But you know, that didn't stop Terry Pratchett, right? Like you can have a very good money-making full-time author life if you write funny stuff and if you write it well. Because I think readers are hungry for it. It's obviously, sadly, it will always be overlooked because nobody appreciates how hard it is to write comedy. But readers will always love you for it. I mean, there's a reason like Jim Butcher's Dresden Files are so popular, and partly that has to do with how much humor he has in his books. I think it's vital. So yeah, stick the humor in everything. Whatever you write, stick some humor in it, please. Please. I'm always looking for it as a reader. I'm a voracious reader.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, and I've you know, humor is one of those things where like if you add it to an action movie, obviously the 80s was masterful at that. You can add it to horror movies. They talk about how Quentin Tarantino will give you a laugh in the middle of the tensest scene in the movie. Like it's an amazing source of contrast, and also even if you're not a fan of the surrounding genre, a laugh is still something you can appreciate.
Yes, and the other thing that people discount, there's a couple of ways it's discounted, one of which is it's incredibly subversive if you use humor properly. Because people don't realize the impact of what you're trying to say if you make them laugh while you say it. I mean, that's sort of the power of stand-up comedy, for example. And then the other thing is that it's an invaluable tool for pacing. Much in the same way that you can use sort of romantic tension for pacing, you can also use a moment of humor for pacing, especially or even particularly if like with a horror flick or a Quentin Tarantino movie, what you primarily have is dark. So if you're mostly dark, this kind of bright moment of humor or laughter or wit or slapstick or whatever it is can really uplift that whole moment in your text. And you can have what is essentially a very quiet scene, but all of your readers will give you a pass and won't think you're boring if you've made them chuckle. So it's a really invaluable tool that I think is underused.
I definitely agree. It's well, something that's less obvious of an addition than say comedy is, you know, you've added paranormal romance elements to steampunk. It sounds like those like a part of it from the start, or did those enter in as the popularity of paranormal romance started to increase?
Well, I was writing right about the time that they were talking about PNR, the bubble collapsing, actually, which, let's be clear, it didn't. But they were starting to talk about that it might. But no, essentially, I make no bones about the fact that there's almost always a romantic thread in my books, and you can probably qualify the series as a whole as romances because I always try to end with a happily ever after. But I was parodying, and I still do parody Gothic lit. So my first book is a romance because it's parodying kind of the romantic Gothics, and then the second book is sort of parodying the atmospheric, cozy Gothics like Castle of Otranto. And so each book in my first series is a parody of a different style of Victorian Gothic literature. And so you're getting romance from that because romance obviously gets all of its tropes from Gothics. So in fact does science fiction and fantasy. So, I mean, it's a very muddled genre, and I guess I'm really writing in any genre. That's the beauty of steampunk, is you can take your setting as steampunk and make sure that your setting is character, and your technology is integral to your plot, and then put other things in there. So I put in urban fantasy and paranormal romance and cozy mysteries in one of them. But that's because I felt kind of compelled, I think, writing in a Victorian setting, to draw on the roots of commercial genre fiction, which is Victorian Gothic literature.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'd never really thought about how far back you can trace some of the tropes that are prevalent in most genre fiction now. Well, I got one more question before I hand you off, because I don't want to take up too much time before we get to the part that everyone's listening for. So you've written books both for adults and young adults. Do you go about plotting or writing a story differently when it's for a different age bracket?
I do a little bit. I'm always slightly obsessed with pace, but I'm even more so with YA. However, I actually pretty comfortably write YA length anyway. So even when I'm writing my adult length stuff, I guess you could say that I use all the YA tricks when I'm writing it. So I tend to really comfortably write 80,000 words, and then I will put in either a secondary POV character, or more description, or more sex scenes, or whatever it is that the book demands, to get it slightly up to a longer length if it's adult. Whereas with YA, it's just there. I would say that for me, YA needs to be cleaner and snappier and more direct in all ways, from the way you describe things, to the way the characters talk to each other, to the way the plot, even though my YA is kind of a twisted espionage conspiracy plot, it still had to be very direct in its untangling. So those are some of the ways that I approach it. And I guess for me also, YA is a different philosophy in regards to the attitudes of the characters. So when you're writing a younger voiced character, their perspective on the world is different, and their character arc and where they're going is different, because part of that arc is self-discovery almost always, because you're going, especially for young adults, you're going from childhood to adulthood. So it's this very necessary, for me, abandonment of sort of the selfishness of childhood for the understandings of adulthood that include kind of your place in the universe and who you're going to be. So yeah, that's the difference.
It's good to hear that, because I've never attempted to write young adult or adult. I've just had books that I've written been identified by the readers as adult or young adult. So it's nice to know what elements that they keyed in on that I can now sort of purposely use in the future.
What they're picking up on from you. You might be giving them these things. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, that's all I have for this section, so I'll hand you off to Jeff for a couple more.
Alrighty. First and foremost, I just want to say I always love talking to another author who loves infusing comedy in their books there, because nothing will make a part of your book stand out more if the reader says to you, man, this part really made me laugh. I woke up my wife in the middle of the night because I was laughing while I was reading it. But I always, with my mystery series, I always get the people that write me fan mail and say, oh yeah, I really love the mystery. You made me wake up my husband at 3 a.m. I'm sorry, but I've never laughed at a murder mystery before. I'm like, sorry, it's my writing style, but whatever there. Okay.
Yes, I love it. My is embarrassing people on public transport. I get people who like to do this, and that they busted up laughing on the bus or the train or something, and I'm like, yes, I won.
There you go. All right. So with regards to writing steampunk, have you ever encountered any difficulties? By way of an example, have you ever had any readers, fans try to correct you on any technological aspects of your books?
So not the technological stuff, because I make it pretty clear that no, that's not true. I did have somebody write to me at one point and say, that's not how dirigibles work. And I turned around and I said, that vampires and werewolves don't exist, right? Just so we're clear, there's no etherosphere. It's just the atmosphere. Anyway, so I do try to make it very, very clear through the sort of establishment of the universe that the science is only faithful to how the Victorians conceived of the world. It's not faithful to the way that our world actually works. And because I do put a lot of historical costume elements in there and stuff, I actually did have somebody once write to me about a flawed food element, which I do not advise this, but I might have gotten on a high horse about it because historical food is one of my absolute passions. I've gone and tried to cook ancient Roman food and like recreated Victorian full-on meals and stuff like that. So like, you can't catch me out on the food. Like, not only do I triage exactly what people were eating, I'm like down to the year and the temporal location and whether they could get some of that stuff in London at that time of year. Like, I have a recipe book that has a recipe for a family of middle-class origin in London for every day of the year in 1876, and I set my series in the 1870s so I could use that book. So I might have done that, what I just did to you guys, to this poor person who wrote me a critique about oysters. So yeah.
I like how you say that the operative word there being you tried to replicate a Roman meal. Did that not go over well?
No, it actually came really, the Victorian one had more problems than the Roman one, as it turned out. The Roman one actually came out really, really well, but the thing was I couldn't cook it immediately. I had to wait like 6 months because I had to grow some of the herbs. We don't use lovage and rue all that regularly in American cooking. Turns out can't really find it at a farmer's market, so I had to go get seeds and grow it in order to then cook with it.
That's dedication for you.
No, complicated.
All right. The second question for you: do you feel your past history as an archaeologist has influenced your writing in any way, shape, or form?
Well, it's given me very good research skills, that's for sure. And kind of no shame in like occasionally just calling up a university department and being like, "Can I speak to your historian on the subject of blah blah blah?" You must have some PhD student can answer my question, because the thing is that experts always want to talk about the thing that they're an expert on, right?
Right.
To get it right in fiction. So yeah, I get that. And I guess for steampunk in particular, it has made me very sort of thoughtful and conscientious about the idea of setting as character and objects, like physical objects having importance in, so like my characters are often associated with an object. My main character in my first series, Alexia, has a kind of Swiss Army knife parasol that goes with her everywhere, that has all these, it's all tricked out and does all these really cool things. And then Sophronia, the sort of spy character in the YA series, she has a bladed fan. Because I'm very interested in taking kind of expected items of proper ladies' garb from the time period and then turning them kind of into weapons and twisting them a little bit. But it also means that I do end up often with these characters that are sort of associated with objects very strongly. And I think that probably has an archaeology thing, since I'm so vested in objects as indicative of culture.
So I got to ask you, what made you give up your Indiana Jones lifestyle for one of writing?
Well, the money was better in writing. So, and I should say this for everybody, that means not only did I have 2 book contracts in the works, but I had 6 months living expenses saved up, health insurance from my partner at the time, and my partner at the time was a VP at a tech company. So yeah, you don't just give up your day job ever. Make sure it's all set.
Sage advice there. Okay, so my last question for you in this particular section here. You have a very successful writing career, so the answer to this is probably nothing, but I'll ask it anyways. Is there anything you wish you would have done differently since becoming a full-time writer?
Oh my goodness. Possibly, I think I've discovered writing retreats more recently, and for me, as my style as a writer, they really work very, very well. So I maybe wish I had looked into doing writing retreats a little earlier on in my career. Yeah, but I mean, there are certainly things I feel like I would have done differently, but I also feel like I'm, in a great place now from where I came from, so I wouldn't want to mess with the timeline too much.
All right, and real quick, like one of our online YouTube viewers by the name of Holly wants to know, what does the team soap mean on your shirt right there?
Oh, so the YA series has 2 love interests because I'm poking fun at the classic love triangle that most like YA literature plays with, and so the 2 love interests are called Soap and Felix.
Oh, I get it. Okay.
Yeah, so that's Team Soap. He's the one that Sophronia, like, spoiler alert, ends up with. There's no doubt, let's be clear, that it really isn't a love triangle. It's just me poking fun at one because no one else stands a chance. But but yeah, so that's the shirt for him for that, because that character's Soap is very, very, very popular as a love interest.
All right. All right. Let me hand you back to Lindsay. We'll get going on the marketing questions for you.
All right, I'm ready.
All right. Well, people will have to read your books now to totally understand.
Sorry about that.
So that was like subtle marketing there.
Yeah, there it is. Yeah.
All right. Well, speaking of marketing, could you tell us kind of like with the traditional stuff, how much did your publisher do, and like what were you expected to do when it came to marketing?
So one of the things you can, at least back, again, this is 10 years ago or so, but back in the days, one of the things you could kind of tell how much marketing clout you were likely to be given by how big your advance was. So like a sort of low-end advance in sci-fi fantasy is you know, $5,000 to 10 or something like that. And then more than that probably means they're going to spend money on you and your books and promoting them. Less than that, they're probably taking the spaghetti at the wall policy and throwing your book at and seeing if it sticks. And then if it really takes off, they might throw some dollars behind. So my advance was decent. It wasn't great. They didn't know what they were doing with this little book, but it was enough for them to do some sort of marketing with it. And then they met me at Denver Worldcon, and I think it was kind of, and then the BEA thing happened, and the book kind of got a little bit of a buzz around it. And I think because of the way I look, and I'm sorry we don't have the video on, but you know, I have a very distinct kind of rockabilly look, and I was a teacher, so I was very used to talking in public, and I love dressing up like fancy with stilettos and everything. I think they decided I would be a good performer. So they decided to send me on a book tour. So they might have spent similar money on somebody else and just not sent them on book tour. But they thought that I would be a good on-the-ground advocate for the book, I think. I don't know. I've never talked to them about this, but I kind of assumed that. Yeah. So I went on book tour for... I didn't go on book tour for the first book, but I definitely went on book tour for the second book. But they also tried, I mean, I was really game, both in my contract and in exchange for experimental stuff. And I always have been with my books. So, like putting the ebooks on sale at a lower price, which was a revelation in 2010, that kind of thing. I really, even though, the publishing house would be like, well, that you're going to have a lower royalty. And I'm like, that's okay. Let's suck them in. There'll be more books. So when they kind of let me kind of run with that kind of thing, which was, I mean, I think when I signed with them, my publishing house was very young. They'd only been a couple of years in the United States. I think they were kind of hungry to make a name for themselves. So they were willing to take some risks. I wouldn't be surprised if there's something about being a comedy author that allowed them to be a little more risk-taking with me than they maybe might have been with, say, hard sci-fi or something. But yeah, so they were pretty unprecedented. And then a couple of there was like an art video for Blameless, which was the third book in my series, which was just a high-speed film of the making of the cover of that book. But that really took off. People love that. I still get people pinging me about that YouTube video. So there were, again, little sort of serendipitous things that happened with the series that really gave it boosts.
Yeah, it sounds like, probably a lot of authors are more like me who wouldn't talk or wouldn't want to go talk in a book tour, would be horrified by the idea. And
yeah,
I guess the secret is to get a 6-figure advance if you're wearing your hoodie and an introvert.
Well, I just found out a venue that you're way better at. Like, if you're way better at Twitter, if you're better, like, typing 142 characters that you can cogitate on for 10 minutes before you press that send button, and not be front-facing, then, spend some time doing that instead, or whatever it is that you're good at. I tend to feel like, if you're a writer, then perhaps what you're really good at is writing. Oh, call me crazy. So maybe you should attempt to capitalize on that in some sort of promotional form. But in my case, it was helpful that I'm not necessarily extroverted, but I certainly play extroverted very, very well in short bursts.
Yeah, I often say, you know, thank goodness for the internet. I've been able to make a living since like 2001 because I can do it all online and I don't have to interact with anybody
Yeah,
in person.
well, I like people. I think that's a crazy thing to say, but I like hanging out with people, especially my people. And I feel like my books went out there and just found my people for me. To the point where I can go at like a Worldcon or a Comic-Con and look at the signing lines for all the different authors, and I know exactly which line is mine because I'm like, those are the people I'd have tea with. They're right there standing in line waiting there inside. Like they're all kind of bold, outrageous ladies in fabulous hats and things. And I'm like, those are my people right there, my people.
Yeah, that's awesome when you can find people that have the same kind of sensibilities and passions as you do through your writing, and when you can bring them together through your writing, it's fun too. All right, so I was going to ask, with the conventions you mentioned where you kind of met your publisher, it sounds like before the books actually came out, were you going to those on your own to do any networking, or did they invite you to come, or are you just a big convention person as it is?
I'm a nerd girl, and I grew up in cons. So, I mean, mostly grew up. I think I went to my first con when I was like 14. And I was big on cosplay. I mean, yeah. So I love I'd been to maybe 3 or 4 World Cons before that one. Worldcon being the biggest one I'd gone to at that juncture. This was before Comic Cons existed. I know there was that world. So yeah, so I was really familiar with con circuit. I also came up through cons at a great time to be coming up as a writer. A lot of my local cons had writer tracks, which I met a lot of friends who were kind of on the same trajectory as me, who are still really good writing buddies of mine, because we would all be going to the same panels together. We'd go to the query panel together, and then we'd go to the like editing your first chapter panel together, you know. And then just again through luck, like right around the time when I needed it, all of those panels started to be how to do your taxes when writing is your hobby, you know. Like, so as I started to get a little trickle of income, then the panels at conventions just seemed to mirror my career, which was so invaluable to me. So yeah, and I was always that. I mean, I'm a big academic anyway, so I was always like bright-eyed and bushy-tailed in the panel room with lots of questions, raising my hand all the time. And yeah, so I feel very, very lucky. So yeah, going to Denver Worldcon was like, I would have gone to Denver Worldcon whether there was a book on the table or not, just, you know, to go, because it was great.
Well, it definitely seems like it was a good idea to meet the publisher ahead of time. So yeah, I guess to anybody listening, if you're get a deal or want a deal, maybe it's not a bad idea to find out which cons the publishers are going to be at.
Yeah, I would say networking, especially in the bar at conventions, is pretty vital, especially after you have any kind of track. So after your first couple of books are out, like if your publisher is dropping you, or if you kind of have a sort of short story record but you don't have anything else yet, like sidling up to a publisher at a bar at a convention, I can count half a dozen author friends of mine who've gotten new book deals that way. There's not a lot better than face-to-face time and networking.
All right, well, those introverts out there, I guess we'll just have to learn the ropes or be happy with our internet sales. Now, I'm curious with the book signings, now that you've kind of done marketing from both sides, the indie focusing on the ebooks and maybe more of the paperbacks with the traditional publishing, or paperbacks and ebooks, do you feel that you actually, do you sell a lot of books when you do those? Is it worth it? It feels like you're kind of hand selling them at those kind of things. Is it?
So like I get good turnout, especially at specific stores. So my biggest turnout is usually Powell's in Portland, and that's 150 people for a signing. And that is a big boost for sales. So that's at least 150 books, and usually they're going to buy back stock. So everyone will probably buy the new book, whatever it is, and then everybody will buy usually 1 or 2 other books. So it's good for the bookstore, and it's a good boost in sales for me. It's really I feel like a book tour or face-to-face signings in stores is really only useful if you're an author like me, which is someone who, if they are going to make the New York Times list and if their publishing house is gunning them for it, are only going to make it once, and they're only going to make it during the first week of release. So really, all of your publicity and all of your marketing dollars and everything is going to be targeted on trying to sell as many as possible that first week, which is why they send me on book tour, I think. Because that's usually just enough, if it happens, to get me over the hump, is the fact that by virtue of having me in the town, people all buy the book at that time, right? They kind of, everybody's like, oh, well, Gail's coming, I'm going to go meet her and buy her new release. Whereas under ordinary circumstances, they might be like, well, I know, I'll buy it next week, or, you know, whatever. So it's used as a vehicle to concentrate buyer power during a restrictive amount of time. For me, the sort of irony of that, of course, is that like when you're about that level as an author, that's about when you really don't want to tour anymore, ever again, which is kind of where I am. I find it pretty loathsome at this juncture. I dislike everything about it except actually talking to people and meeting people, but the surrounding travel is kind of brutal. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, and the other thing is, and this is something that I should say from a philosophical perspective from the get-go, is that my interest is not necessarily in point of sales, because I can afford to not be that concerned with it, which it's a horrible way of putting it. I'm not doing this right, but when I'm on the internet, when I'm using social media, and when I'm marketing, what I'm interested in is finding my existing readership, if I don't have contact with them already, providing them with something that reminds them that I exist during the time when I can't actually produce a book, so that when I do have a book come out, I haven't fallen out of their minds. So my primary interest is not in like, I am an author, this is my book, go buy it. My primary interest is in being like, hey, remember me? Here's a fun octopus image. So the way I utilize social media and the way I utilize like signing events and that sort of stuff is kind of different from the way a lot of indie authors approach marketing. In other words, my primary goal is quality over quantity.
Do you think there's any point in a newer author, indie or even trad pub, going to these book signings or trying to maybe arrange some local ones if they are more outgoing and like to talk to people? Or do you feel like it's more like you kind of need a name before you're going to draw enough people to make it worthwhile?
So there are ways to kind of deal with both of those things, which is, I know some authors have good success putting like a panel together at a bookstore, at a local bookstore. So if you happen to have a group of local authors, you can all go and do a bookstore together, and that way you can kind of all pull in your fans together. It really rides on whether you have a relationship with the bookstore. The thing I've noticed more than anything else is that I can really gauge how many people are going to turn up by the enthusiasm or lack thereof of the exchange I have with whoever the bookstore events coordinator is. So I can tell pretty quickly whether it's going to be a good event or a bad event by how excited those people are. Yeah, I mean, they need to be interested in your event and excited about it and kind of promoting it, and, you know, and if they're not, then the only people that are going to show up are your friends and family, frankly.
All right. I'm curious, you've got a newsletter sign up on your Amazon page, and we've kind of had a mix with traditionally published authors where some of them just kind of let the publisher handle it. And sometimes the publisher puts the link to their newsletter at the end of the books instead of, you know, anything that's going to send them to your website. So how did you go about setting up your newsletter, and how are you using it to keep in touch with folks?
Okay, so I am enough out of indie to be a huge newsletter advocate. And these days at conventions, I get more and more of my traditionally published author friends like sidling up to me and being like, so newsletter. And I'm like, you haven't done it yet. Like, is my response. Like, I think a newsletter, a website, and it doesn't have to be a big one. It could just be a WordPress or whatever. And a newsletter are like the two most important things that any author should have, like, period, no question. And even the website in this day and age is mostly to get people on your newsletter and or to provide, contacts, press contacts or whatever with basic information. I use my website and my blog as sort of an FAQ thing now. So I will get the same question 500 times over. So I just do a blog post about it. And then when people ask me that question in the future on social media, I can just direct them there. But the newsletter is, I don't know, it's so important. I can't, and the main reason is that you own those eyeballs. Like those are the only eyeballs that you own yourself. They're not distracted by any other aspects of platform. It's not Facebook who's going to boot you out because you have a pseudonym. Like, the newsletter is yours. So I think it's absolute. Like, I don't think you should publish a book without having a newsletter ready to go, frankly. So yeah, but again, my philosophy on my newsletter is quality over quantity. So I have 17 books in print, and over a dozen of those are New York Times bestsellers, but I only have 5,000 people on my newsletter. And that's because I cull. So if you have joined my newsletter, MailChimp allows you to do this. I can go back through, and if you've not opened it in, 6 to 8 months, it's clearly getting stuck in spam or something, you're off my newsletter. I'm way more interested in a high open rate. So I like to keep my newsletter open rate and satisfaction rate really, really high. So my open rate's 62 to 67%. And I like to keep it there. So I want active and engaged readers who are really excited to get that newsletter. And I write it with that in mind. So I'm talking to people who are advocates of my books. They love my books. They just want to hear from me what's going on in my writing life. If I've read anything fun recently that I think is kind of similar to my stuff, I'll put in a couple of links to that. And I do it once a month, pretty regularly at the very beginning of the month. So everybody knows that. The only thing I give away for free is on my newsletter. So if you want anything like swag, free previews of my upcoming stuff, or even books, because I am trad, so I tend to have a lot of extra physical books lying around. You got to belong to my newsletter. I'll give away a goodie box occasionally, which is just like full of sort of fun steampunk stuff. But you must belong to my newsletter to get any of that stuff. So I don't do things like join consortiums to offer free stuff in order to get signups. I just don't participate in anything like that because I'm not interested in eyeballs that are only interested in like getting something for free. I want my newsletter readers to be kind of my advocates and genuine fans of my work. So that's how I sort of operate that side.
Yeah, I totally sympathize with you on that, or empathize with you, or I don't know, some vocabulary word. So I'm the same way. I want somebody that's actually read the book, or at least one of the books, before I try to get them on my newsletter. But I feel like I'm in the minority these days. There's a lot of people doing the Insta freebie and having success with it. So
I don't know that I would necessarily. The other thing I do is I use my newsletter. I mean, I have a specific kind of reader, and I know a great deal about them. I'm very, like I said, interested in demographics. So I know like my age bracket, I know their hobbies, I know a lot about my readership. And so my readership tends to be, for example, the kind of sort of helpful readership, like they're really interested in like being involved. So I often will survey and poll them off of the newsletter, and almost, I did a survey recently that got like 3,000 people answering the survey questions. And it was not a short survey, it was a long survey. But people were just like, yay, of course, I'll take a survey. If Gail wants to know things, I'll tell her things, and it can be simple stuff like who's your favorite character, which is me asking who your favorite character is, but is also me asking like, if I were going to write a novella about one of these side characters, like is my audience really interested in that character, or should I maybe do a different novella first? I utilize my newsletter pretty heavily too, but that they like that. I think it makes them feel like they're very kind of involved in my career. And that's kind of part of my brand, is I want my readers to kind of feel like we're kind of hand-holding in this together. Because we are. I mean, like,
definitely. And it does excite them to I guess I would do a survey too. I always think I don't want to bother anybody, but if one of my favorite authors wanted information, I would be really excited to have my voice heard, I guess.
Absolutely. Of course. Well, that's frankly, that is like, if you wanted my foremost like governance for behavior, it's that I am an incredibly voracious reader and a huge fangirl of authors myself. And so generally I behave exactly how I would want my favorite author to behave at all times. Like, that's my simple rule. And so, you could say that in the back of my head is like, what would Mercedes Lackey do? Right? Just always, how would Mercedes Lackey handle this? Like, what's the etiquette? Well, what would, or how would I want Mercedes Lackey to behave? And yeah, and it's like one of those things where, I get the same questions hundreds of times, like sometimes hundreds of times a day. And, but it's hundreds of times for me, but for that reader, it's the first time she has reached out usually to ask her favorite author this question. And so it's like, I can't even come up with the extreme word. Like, it is mandated upon me to treat her with the kind of integrity that I would want to be treated if I got up the courage to talk to my favorite author. And so that's like, I have to behave that way, and there's no reason why I shouldn't. Like, I can't. The idea of, I don't know, hurting a reader just because you've heard that question a million times before or whatever is so untenable to me. I can't even. It boggles the mind.
That's definitely a good attitude to have, and admirable too when you're getting a question 100 times to be able to keep that in mind and remember that it's the first time for them. All right, one last question. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, the other thing is that, like for example, I'm known as like a huge fan of tea and octopi and all of these things. So if there's something in the zeitgeist, like a new octopus video, 80 people on Twitter are going to share that video with me. But I'm not going to get annoyed with it because it's doing exactly what I wanted, which is they saw a video of an octopus and they thought about Gail Carriger, who's some author whose book they read 6 months ago, right? So that's exactly how I want social media to behave for me on a purely mercenary level, is that they saw something and connected it with me at a time when I had no product. And that's my entire goal, and as a sort of for the marketing side of being online. I also love the octopus video. I could do without seeing it 80 times, but I say thank you all 80 times, because the thank you is that not that I'm seeing the video because I've already seen it, but that you thought of me when you saw that video.
That's right. They see octopus and they think of you. No, that's great though. I'm sad I'm not in my home office because I've got a stuffed kraken on my shelf behind me usually when I'm there that a fan sent me because I had one in a story once. So I understand. All right, we've been chatting here already for almost an hour, so I better let the guys talk. But I did have one last question. You actually mentioned in your email to me that you kind of wanted to talk about using the Amazon Associates codes in marketing. Whoops.
People never talk about this, and it's like a trick that I've used so much, and I just kind of want to share it with everyone, and this seems like the perfect venue for it, which is if you don't have an Associates code, you should definitely have an Associates code and use it for everything. So if you're recommending a book to somebody, like, use the Associates code. If you're talking about your own book, use that Associates code. But what I have used it for in the past is for if I want to pivot to write something new. So for example, something you can do with an Associates code is go look and see everything that everybody bought after buying your book. And it doesn't tell you anything specific about the person, but it tells you their buying habit after they bought your book. And sometimes that's like a laptop computer, which is great because you get 10% of that. But often it's just a whole bunch of other books. And that will give you insight into your readership that they won't necessarily tell you about. They won't necessarily cop to reading some of the other books that they read. So for example, my urban fantasy that's coming out in July is male male. And I knew I could do that, and I knew that my readership, maybe not all of them, but certainly some of them are quite happy to follow me into male, slightly dirty urban fantasy, because I've seen them buy that stuff off of my Associates code in bulk a lot of it. So now they might not tell me that if I surveyed them, but I can sure see them do it because and that'll also, similarly, it can tell you something about, say, if you're trying to choose cover art. So if you know what your readership is buying in terms of sort of visually what's catching their attention, if you're thinking about sort of changing your cover art, if you want to do an A/B test with some of your cover art, then you can take a look at what other cover art they're going for. And so you can make a selection that way. And then quite off the cuff recently, I was chatting with my film agent about this, and she was like, well, do you know other information about what people buy after they buy your books? Like, are they big Dawn detergent people? Because that can certainly help out if you're pitching for, say, a miniseries to advertisers. Like, do Gail Carriger fans like to wash their dishes in Dawn? A film company would really like to know that kind of information. So your associate's code is real valuable. So good data. Love that data.
All right, this is the part where I talk about all the adult toys that get purchased when I've finished writing a series where it took 7 books for the hero and heroine to finally culminate their relationship together. So you can get some interesting things in your affiliate reports.
Oh, yes.
And I should say, too, that when you're traditionally publishing and you're only getting your reports like every 6 months, it can be kind of a hidden way to, some of the advertisers will let you run your affiliate link, or if you do a Facebook post and boost it, so you can actually see these people bought, I sold 30 books or whatever that day.
When I tweet about having a new book out from a traditional publisher, I will link with my associates to that book. Of course.
Yeah, and with those $10 or $15 books, you'll actually make a little money.
Yeah, well, I know, like I said, I'm pretty into demographics, so I know my click-throughs. So I know, like, one tweet for recommending an author or something like that, it's about 400 click-throughs on Twitter. And not all those people are going to buy it, but, that's significant enough, and then I can look at my associate's code to see how many of them actually did buy it. But, yeah, that's not insubstantial. I mean, I was looking at my numbers recently, and we're talking on my laptop, so I can't really tell you, but I make as much with my percentage wise, my sales for my independent works on all 3 of the other platforms, so Nook, Kobo, and iTunes, are about the same percentage as my associates' earnings a year. So yeah, use that code by all means.
Yeah, it can definitely pay for your newsletter hosting and some other good stuff too, even if you're just a newer author who's not selling huge piles of books yet.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, well, let me let the guys talk. I'm sorry I've been hogging you up here. I think I think you're giving a lot of great information, and we appreciate it.
Yep. Fortunately, some of the questions I was going to ask have sort of been covered already, so I can abbreviate my session a little bit and get you out of here a little bit sooner.
This is the theme with this podcast.
Exactly. All right. So first off, okay, you say people associate you with octopuses, octopi.
Yes.
That's a tricky plural.
It is.
But I assume that happened very naturally, right?
No. There's a prevailing octopus theme iconography throughout my first series. There's an octopus on the spine of the book, and the octopus represents the bad guys and sort of the good guys throughout the series. So, and yeah, I am obsessed with octopi, and they love them, so that's why it's there. But I think it's hard to think back to that time, but I was thinking about the fact that it's an iconic shape and image that I would like associated with my brand. Absolutely.
So would you say that's a technique that people should pursue? Like just try to pick a thing that will people will associate with you, so that you have a gimmick, basically? It
doesn't always work. I mean, like anything, it's kind of hard to manipulate that sort of thing. Like my most recent series, I intentionally named it the Custard Protocol in the hopes that people would bring me custard to eat at my events, because people are always bringing me kind of food and snacks, and custard's my favorite food. So I was like, I'm going to call these books the Custard Protocol books, because then maybe I will get tribute in the form of custard. And it hasn't really worked that well. I like to joke that, you should put, very expensive cars and a lot of chocolate in your books, and then just cross your fingers and hope.
Right, exactly.
But I don't think it hurts to have something you're associated with. You know, I have a friend, Sam Sykes, and he's obsessed with his pug. So he always has pictures of his pug. And so now for him, it's doing a similar thing to, you know, the way the octopus is for me, which is people see a pug and they think about Sam. And so, you know, they connect with him over Twitter or Facebook or whatever and show him the picture of the pug. And, you know, he likes the pug and he's excited about it. But the point is more that, you know, they were thinking about him when they saw the pug.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it worked, yeah.
Yeah, as long as it doesn't end up feeling forced, I think that
it should be, I think with anything, and I think this way about like the platforms that you choose to use on social media, is you have to enjoy it and you have to love it. Or like your writing being forced or your writing being awkward, I think it will show if you're not like genuinely interested and engaged. So yeah, I mean, I absolutely put stuff that I am excited about and interested in it. I'm thrilled. But the other thing is readers, and again, we're back to like how you would feel with your favorite author, is they want a point of connection with you because they love your books, but they kind of know everybody talks to you about your books. So if you give them other things as an icebreaker, as a sort of social media form of small talk, then you know they can begin to open a dialogue with you. That is partly part of being a loyal reader. And something like the octopus or tea or whatever is a means to that dialogue. It's to be like, oh, you know, what's your favorite tea? I love tea too. And suddenly we're having a conversation. It doesn't feel as awkward as it might if they said for the millionth time, I love your books.
yeah, that's definitely useful. And also, you know, again, if you talk about someone being introverted, having a thing that everyone can sort of like having that entry point to any conversation is a handy thing to have.
Yeah, it's a shared love that is very endemic in fandom too. Like whatever your thing is, if it's those ghastly pop vinyl dolls, or you know, like, or a mutual love of Doctor Who, for example. Like, it's this speaking sort of with an archaeological hat on. It's sort of this innate sense of kind of tribalness and belonging that forms a sort of network and a framework of conductivity that I think. If people are on the internet and interfacing on the internet and reaching out to you, that's what they're searching for. They're searching for connection.
Yeah, and that leads us into my last question for this section. Speaking of tribalness and you know belonging, you say that your books sort of found your audience for you, and let's say you're just starting off and you don't have a loyal audience. Also, tying in with the genuineness that we were talking about, do you think that it's more useful to like try to write to a pre-existing audience, or do you write what you are genuinely interested in, maybe gearing it toward, you know, elements of popularity, and just trust that you're going to be able to find your audience later?
I do think it's important to write the thing that you're passionate about, but I think people are more flexible in their passions than they often give themselves credit for. So I know a lot of writers who say started out writing one genre, and it's just that their voice, myself included, it's just that their voice didn't really suit that genre. Like I should have known from the get-go, because comedic short stories was what I sold and the only thing I sold. But I kept trying to write the sort of dark, gritty, epic fantasy, YA epic fantasy stuff, and it just took me 10 years to realize that what I needed to write was sort of comedic grown-up stuff, right? That what the world wanted from me was this sort of lighter touched comedic. And so I think a lot of younger writers would benefit from switching gears and trying different things. A lot of people get sort of caught up in one universe, or they have grand plans for like a 7-book series or something. And really what they need to do is try a bunch of different things. If you're a voracious reader and you're reading in different genres, then try writing in different genres or different subgenres or with different styles. You know, like, you know, try your noir-y urban fantasy and then try some epic, you know, like, so I do think that's one thing I would do if you're not getting any traction from what you've been doing. Just switch it up, and have faith in yourself as a writer enough to know that if you're passionate about it, you can probably write it. So far as like finding an audience, so one of the things that I did in the early days of the internet when I was a new author was I went and poked about and looked at all of my favorite authors and then a bunch of other authors to see how they were doing it. So how was Neil Gaiman handling Twitter? How was Mercedes Lackey handling Twitter. She wasn't, as it turns out. Just to see like kind of less than like I want to steal their audience, and more how do I model my behavior in a way that isn't off-putting. You know, like how do I get a handle on the etiquette of use of all of these crazy new platforms? Because I tend to join the new social media platform kind of as soon as I can, so I own my name. You know, and now we're lucky enough to be able to, you can find a good blog post on how to hack Instagram as an author or whatever. But back then it wasn't. So like I really do encourage newer authors to look at the way other authors are acting online and what they're doing wrong or right, especially authors that they like and read. So you are reacting to them in the way the readers you want, your loyal, loving readers are going to react to you. So go find them and follow them and see how they're handling it and whether they're doing it right or wrong or well, and you know, why are you turned off by something and turned on by something else as a consumer? So that is one way I would do it. I think, I mean, with Facebook advertising and things like that, you can certainly target in onto people's audiences, but you better have a really good handle about what qualities it is that people really love about that other author's audience. I mean, because I might think intellectually that everybody who loves my books also loves Douglas Adams, but that's not necessarily the case. It's just that I love Douglas Adams. And one of the things I've been doing is I've been running a book group now for 3 years via Goodreads, where I just pick books that I love and a group of my fans and I, we all read that book, whatever it is. And I've picked wildly over all the different subgenres. And it's totally fascinating to me which one my readers love, because I will think, well, you know, Newt's Emerald is really like my books, but that's not the one they love the most. They love Naomi Novik's Uprooted, which is so completely not like my stuff. So it's really hard to pick what people are gravitating towards when they love an author. So whether your book or writing style appeals to that reader group is really hard to know, and could be a big fat waste of money.
Yeah, it's amazing. Like, it's amazing how much you can be off target on, well, I know that I enjoy this book and I tried to write like it, so surely people who enjoyed that book will like my writing. And you can be way off target because it turns out the stuff you liked and the stuff you emulated wasn't the same flavor as the broad readership.
Yeah, precisely. I mean, I'm still flummoxed by like my carryover readership on occasion. Like someone will say, I love this book, and I will say, you like that author? I'm like, okay. I'm like that author and I, like, if you put our 2 books together in an ascension chamber, might be antimatter and matter, you know, like we probably, like, we're so different. But hey, no accounting for taste, really, is the end.
Yep. All right, I'm going to hand you off to Jeff so we can get some questions in before we wrap it up.
All right.
Okay, well, just like Joe, I think that several of mine were already covered. We talked about, you know, online social media, so I need to ask that one. And then maybe Joe did that one. So, Mike, first and foremost, I was going to tell you real quick. Personally, I think Hank the Octopus stole the show in Finding Dory. I thought that.
I agree. I could not agree with you more. Absolutely.
Real quickly, when he like tapped on that thing, locked the doors, and said "suck it, bipeds," I damn near fell out of the chair. So, but all right. So essentially my last question I have for you is: we've talked about the importance of having an eye-catching cover on the show numerous times. So for the record, your covers look fantastic. So in your opinion, what are some common mistakes to avoid when working on creating a cover?
Ooh. So I guess for me, the most important thing is what you think looks good and really like as an image, or really gravitates for it, doesn't necessarily mean it's going to make a good cover art. And so, because the cover art is not, this is really hard to get across, especially to the epic fantasy, because sometimes it does for epic fantasy. So epic fantasy, tune out for just a second. But by and large, a cover doesn't represent what's going on inside your book. It's a message that's more like an elevator pitch about what your book is about. So what the cover's goal is to get the right reader to read your book more than anything else. It's not to tell the reader what's in it. It's not any of these other things. It's just to spark their curiosity to say, hey, that looks like the kind of book I would like. Because the almost worse than a bad cover is a wrong cover that gets you the wrong audience. Like, God forbid Dan Simmons's readers read my book. Like, no, like, don't want those people reading my book. So if I had a Dan Simmons, like, suspensey cover, I would get the wrong readership and a whole bunch of 1 stars on Amazon and no career whatsoever. So it's more important that you have a right cover than you have a beautiful cover. And I think a lot of indie authors forget that. And one of the ways to develop that eye, if you're going to go into production, if you're going to go into small business, which is what you are if you're self-publishing, is to take the authorial hat off your head, but to take a look at covers that are striking in all different genres. So kind of, and within your own genre. So I, for example, take out, I have a BookBub subscription, partly because I do buy and read a lot of books, but also because I'm interested in all the cover art that's coming through. And so I BookBub subscribe to all these different sort of genres in which I write, in which I might write, in which I read, partly to see what the cover art's looking like these days, what the trends are and that sort of stuff. But also you can pay attention to what's winning awards in covers art and stuff like that. And kind of train yourself to appreciate the aesthetic of a good cover, even if you don't like it, because that cover is a message. It's saying something about a literary book, which, like, I don't read lit fic, but there are very striking lit fic covers which are telling the readership something about that genre. So that would be a big one for me, is you got to get over this idea that the cover must represent a scene from your book. And you have to go for the right cover that is telling your reader the right thing over the beautiful. They can be both, but if push comes to shove, right and accurate is better than pretty.
Very true. Yeah, it's more like your cover is almost depicting tropes that are found inside your book, not necessarily a scene from your book.
Yes,
so to speak.
Exactly. Because you get to work. So the cover gets them to read the blurb or gets them to pick up the book and flip it over. Then it's your job, right? The blurb is what's going to get them to buy that book. And that, you're a writer, so you better do that beautifully and well. Because that's when your job kicks in, right? It's the cover artist's job, or you, if you're the cover artist, like that other half of your identity's job to do the cover right. But it's your real job as a writer to sell them on the book through that blurb. And you can shine there, and you give them a taste of exactly what it is they're in for, and then if they're the right reader, they will buy it. But the cover art really just has to get them to pick it up, whether that's digitally or physically.
Yeah, I'm one of those few people, as far as I'm aware, that I don't agree with the saying, don't judge a book by its cover, because unfortunately, you really do.
Yeah. And I mean, I love books, clearly. And I review them quite a bit. I talk about them in my blog a lot. Because if I find a book that I love, I just want to share it with everybody. I want the world to know about it. I am one of those people. And occasionally I will find a book and it just has a gruesome cover, and that can be because it's indie, or it can be because it's often small press, occasionally big five. But and I will apologize for the cover. I will tell my readership, I'll be like, I'm so sorry about this cover, you guys. Please forgive this book. Give it a chance. Because even coming from me, even coming from a trusted advocate, a bad cover, people are just not, they're just not going to pick it up. They just aren't. It's fighting so hard against your book. So a good one is, God, it's so important.
Yeah, so that's my advice to anyone that always asks me, like, how did you get started? What's important, what's not. It's like, well, I know you might think this, not, aside from what that common saying is, make sure your cover is eye-catching, because those, when you're looking at, say, the ebooks, you're only given a certain amount of time here, and it's usually a really small window. That as long as the cover catches your eye, then from then they typically move over to the blurb. Then it's up to you to make the sale, so to speak.
Absolutely. And you can get a jump start on this as an author by like starting a Pinterest board. You can start a secret board or however you want to do it, Evernote, whatever it is, and just collect eye-catching covers for yourself. And you can kind of see like whatever genre you want to sink in, or if we're discussing stealing someone's readership, kind of see what is the right icon for you, for your words. What is the right
look
symbol? Yeah. And which ones are eye-catching and why are they eye-catching, and just kind of start training yourself to think about cover art from a marketing perspective. It's a dirty word, but we got to use it.
I hear that. Alrighty, that is the last of my questions there. So let me hand you back over to Lindsay. We'll try and wrap this up for you.
Cool.
All right. Well, thanks for sticking in with us there for over an hour, and you don't even sound tired yet.
To everybody listening who stuck with us this far.
Oh, they're out walking their dogs or on the treadmill, so they need something to listen to, I'm sure. That's my hope anyway. That's what I do when I listen to podcasts. So in closing, do you have any tips for authors who are maybe, I don't know, if you had to do it right now, would you still try to go traditional first, or do you think you would start with self-publishing?
I would probably still try for traditional, and not necessarily because of the validation, but because of the boost that it did give me, kind of marketing and that sort of stuff. It does open the doorway to brick and mortar. I don't know how much longer, honestly, we're going to need that now. But also because, and I say this a lot, which is imagine you're back in 7th grade. Hopefully you're a little older than that. But imagine you're back in 7th grade and someone took your best fiction essay and stuck it on the internet right now. How mortifying that would feel. So just remember that as much as you love it, it probably needs more work than you think it does. So you might want to run it through some editing and, get yourself a good developmental editor and stuff like that. If you are going to go the whole indie route. The story is yours, but the book does require other fingers to be consumable, I guess. So yeah, I guess that's one thing I would say.
All right. Do you have any tips? I guess it's been 10 years since you got your first deal, but for anybody that did want to try traditional publishing now, have you heard, like, what's the best way to actually get someone to look at your story these days?
Well, I think you need an agent. I hate to say that. So your gatekeeper these days is not even the publishing houses anymore. It's really the agencies. And the thing to keep in mind with agents, just so you don't like get ego bruised from the constant rejections, and yes, we were all pretty constantly rejected from the get-go, is that what an agent is looking for is a long-term commercial success, or what a good agent is looking for. And for them, that's a great deal larger number of high-volume sales as a rule than for an indie. So if you are being rejected by an agent, it is usually because they don't see it as a commercial, like a big commercial success, rather than it has nothing to do with the quality of the book at all. It's purely as to whether they can sell it or not. And often if they know an editor who would be interested in it. So yeah, don't get disheartened by rejections. We all of us collect them. It's very exciting. And nothing's going to be as brutal as the first like 3 or 4 one-star reviews you get on Amazon. So you might as well get used to it one way or another. Like, everyone's going to reject you at some point. Nobody writes the brilliant book that everyone loves. There's always somebody who hates it. I feel very, very lucky that the first review I got ever was a Goodreads review that was 1 star. And I was like, oh, now I'm prepared.
Oh, that's a crushing way to start, but I guess it will harden you.
No, it was good. Because somebody read it and was like, or someone started to read it and was like, I don't read this kind of book, 1 star. And I was like, well, there you go. Not my audience. That's how it goes.
All right. Well, why don't you finish up by telling us where people can find you, and if you have any new projects coming out or anything they can check out.
So you can find me on the Twitters. If you Google Gail Carriger, you can find me. My website and all that sort of stuff. I should say that I really don't talk about the business of writing very much, except on other people's podcasts. Thank you for having me. It's not really part of my thing to do blog posts about this sort of thing or anything like that. I just like flapping my jaw with friendly strangers on the subject. I go up on Ditch Diggers occasionally as well, which is another podcast like this one. So if, again, in this sort of managing your social media follower thing that I've been talking about, if that's what you're looking for, then probably not. But if you're interested in tea and octopi and Victorian fashion and silliness and ridiculousness and lightheartedness, then you can absolutely track me down. I'm on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, Pinterest, all the things. Pinterest is one of those things I want to throw out because you guys haven't talked about it much elsewise as well, which is purely from a demographic standpoint. Pinterest has given me tremendous insight into the other interests of my readership because I take a look at their boards when they follow me. And that has had a synergistic effect on how I will be targeting Facebook ads once I start taking out Facebook ads. Because Pinterest, for example, has told me that I have a lot of knitters, a lot of crafters, a lot of Doctor Who fans, a lot of people who are into tattoos. And these are all ways that I can target my Facebook advertising. So there's another little tip on how one type of social media can help you triage another.
All right. Yeah, sounds good. We haven't had too many people talk about Pinterest. I know I started out in the beginning pinning a bunch of stuff and my covers and steampunk things, but it's probably been 4 years since I logged in, so I'll have to check it out again someday.
Well, I mean, if you don't, like I said, with anything, if you don't really enjoy it, then don't do it. I only just got into it and I really love it. But my cover art designer also uses it. So we use it to share sort of secret board, inspiration boards for new covers and stuff like that. And yeah, the next major thing I have is this crazy, raunchy, fabulous, sexy, ridiculous, hilarious urban fantasy about a mage and a werewolf in which I poke fun at all paranormal romance and urban fantasy tropes. It's set in the San Francisco Bay Area and it's coming out in July. And I can't officially announce it yet because I don't have the title or anything ready to go. But keep an eye out for that. It's gonna shake up Comic-Con, that's for sure.
All right, cool. Well, for those listening after July of 2017, I assume, maybe they can go look you up and check out that book.
Yeah.
All right. And in the meantime, GailCarriger.com, I assume we'll get them all the good information and look you up on Amazon. You're there and check out the books. Thanks for listening, everyone. And thanks for joining us, Gail.
Thank you guys for having me so much.
Thanks for all the info, Gail. It was nice to meet you.
Very nice to meet you. I hope we maybe run into each other at a con sometime.
There you go.
If you guys ever do actually do anything in person.
So long, everybody.
Occasionally we leave the cave, but it's kind of scary out there, you know?
It's not.